Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to hold on for a few seconds while we allow our platform to let everyone in. In the meantime, you're welcome to use the chat box to say hello and let us know where you're tuning in from today, and we'll get started in just 1 minute. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to continue to hold on for just a few seconds while the platform lets everyone in. In the meantime, you're welcome to use the chat box to say hello and let us know where you're tuning in from today. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Wow, look at all those cities and states. Got such a variety of audience members today for this incredible panel. Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and get started as you guys continue to let us know where you're tuning in from. We're excited to greet you and get started with this panel today. We have some incredible speakers, and we want to save as much time as possible for them to share. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to our webinar, Culture and Community, Impacts on BIPOC Mental Health. My name is Naya McCrae-Brown, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at MHA's National Office, and I'll be moderating today's session. A few notes before I introduce our presenters. The webinar will be recorded and will be emailed out to all registrants within 1 week. We do not offer CEUs, but if you would like a certificate of attendance, we have a form for you to request one. We will post the link to that form in the chat shortly, and it will be included in the follow-up email as well. We might have time at the end for some Q&A, so please post your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation, and we'll go through some of those questions at the end if time allows. Feel free to make comments or share some of your knowledge in the chat as well. We want this to be interactive and engaging. And now I'm so excited to introduce today's presenters, Dr. Lisette Sanchez, Melody Lee, and Sinclair Caesar III. Dr. Lisette Sanchez is a bilingual and bicultural licensed psychologist, writer, coach, and speaker. She founded Calathea Wellness, a virtual practice providing individual therapy, coaching, and speaking services. Growing up in Southern California with immigrant parents from El Salvador and Mexico, she developed a passion for working with BIPOC folks and first-generation professionals. As a psychologist, she helps individuals heal from intergenerational trauma and overcome the imposter phenomenon. In addition, she contributes to publications like The Hip Latina, Well and Good, and Wondermind. She also runs the mental health workshops for Fortune 500 companies across the country, supporting their diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging efforts, and employee resource group programming. Melody Lee is a queer Asian therapist, speaker, and activist. They embody a number of structural privileges, including education, non-disabled, and skin color. They founded Inclusive Therapists, a social justice-oriented mental health directory and community that celebrates the power and centers the needs of marginalized communities. They also founded Mental Health Liberation, a nonprofit bridging BIPOC individuals with free, quality therapy and empowering clinicians of color. Lee offers collective care and education focusing on decolonizing mental health and healing racialized trauma. As a colony-born migrant and settler on Turtle Island, they advocate for land back, Indigenous sovereignty, and Black liberation as a priority. Sinclair Caesar III is a speaker and consultant who is dedicated to crushing the stigma surrounding mental health. Since 2012, he has collaborated with 30+ organizations such as Johns Hopkins University, Carey Business School, the Alliance on Mental Illness, St. Peter's University City Year, and the San Antonio Junior League. Sinclair has partnered with Apple Award-winning wellness company Shine, and his audio meditations have been experienced over 15,000 times. His articles and social media content with The Mighty have garnered hundreds and thousands of views as well. Welcome, speakers. We're so excited to have you joining us here today. At MHA, we are honoring Bibi Moore Campbell, National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, or BIPOC Mental Health Month. Today, we will be diving into the importance of community and culture in regards to our mental health. So without further ado, we're going to jump into some questions. My first question for all of you is I'd like for you just to share a little bit more about what the words community and culture mean to you. Those are huge words and they mean different things to different people. What do those words mean to you and what influence have they had on your lives and mental health journeys? Whoever wants to jump in first is welcome to.
I'll jump in. I think we're also, we want to share the space so much. So, hi everyone. I'm so grateful and so excited to be here in community with you all to have this conversation or this discussion together. And it fills me with so much joy to see how many folks are joining this and seeing the chat, seeing everyone coming from everywhere. If you're coming from the San Fernando Valley, know that you all have a special place in my heart because that is where I grew up and that is my home. And so I bring that up because this question is like, what does community and culture mean to you? So for me, it means everything. It's the motivation behind what I do, and it is what helps me feel empowered to keep going, to do the work that I do. Growing up in an immigrant household, feeling very confused by, I think the stigma around mental health around me, the lack of terms for how to define the experiences we were having, and being able to be in this space where I can learn to, or help destigmatize and help empower others has been so special. And I feel like the only way that I'm able to do that is because of the support of my community, because of the strengths that are within my culture. And that's also something that I talk a lot about because I think sometimes in society, when you have had so many oppressive experiences and your culture has been put down and you're told that the way that you were raised was wrong, you forget to lean into the ways that we were raised and the strengths that come from that. And so I'm sure I will be speaking more on that, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will share a bit more, but that's why it's important to me. To me, it's everything. And I wouldn't be here without my culture or my community. Thank you.
I wouldn't be here either. And I think that really sums it up for me. Where would I be without the people in my life and the support in my life? I got a quick question for those who are watching. If you are excited about Mental Health America webinars like this, just type a yes in the chat. Because I'm excited. I've been telling my whole family about this. Like, listen, y'all, I get to talk about mental health. I get to talk about mental wellness. It's Minority Mental Health Month. I'm excited. Yes. And I saw some folks from Jersey. I actually grew up in New Jersey. And so for me, community and culture have meant a lot of things. I've lived in Oregon. I've lived in Texas, which is where I am now in San Antonio. I've lived in Pennsylvania. So I met my wife outside of Philly. I've lived so many places. And what that's meant is trying to figure out what family looks like, what connectedness looks like in new places, which has been a struggle sometimes, but has also been enriching, especially when I was in Oregon and I looked around and I was like, it's just me out here. Like if you know what I mean, you know what I mean. But I really feel like for me, culture means shared values. And so we're kind of looking in the same direction. And for me, it's also those things that you can't really explain, right? So we talk a lot about code switching in circles that I'm in, right? So there are things I just don't have to explain, or I can make references to like TV shows, like have you seen Martin? Or remember that scene from Jamie Foxx? Or I can put on some really cool, Luther Vandross song and everybody's just joining in. And some of those things extend past the culture I would say that I belong to. But for me, when I'm in those circles, it's immediate healing for me. And when I would say community, I think about Tracy Ellis Ross, who's the star of Blackish and has done all types of things in her life. And Tracy Ellis Ross talks about the space in between where she is and where she wants to be. And she says, I allow that space to inspire me, but not terrify me. But I know for me, this brother, I can often feel terrified between that space between where I am now and where I want to be because of uncertainty, because I feel alone. And one thing I appreciate about community is it's this collective approach to getting through that space, right? How are we going to pay the bills next month? What are we going to do about these kids? How am I going to get to work the next day? Being able to reach out and lean on people for support, which I haven't always been great at, but having a grandma, or having a wife or having a cousin that's like, hey, I know you need it. I see you struggling. Let me help you. Having those people to help me move through those space has been transformational for me. And it's that strength that Dr. Sanchez was just talking about to help me get to places I never thought possible because I have that community.
There's so much beauty in this space. I'm grateful to be amongst panelists. And as I'm hearing y'all share, like beauty just kept popping up to me when I think about culture. I think about art. I think about traditions. I think about sharing of food, of music. And there's just so much richness and beauty and celebration in our culture, which is connected to our communities too, where, folks come together. And when I think about the, an intersection of culture and community, I think about finding our people. And I think that's part of our discussion today. Some of us may be rooted to this land. Some of us may be migrants. Some of us may have been displaced. And so I'm hearing like connectedness to land, but also one another. How do we find our people? And the thing I love about culture and community and connection to mental health is these are co-creations. We get to create culture. We get to create community. These aren't set boxes that we necessarily have to fit into. But when we find our people, we find a sense of belonging. We're known and accepted. We can uplift one another. And those are my favorite things about community and culture. And also, I love learning about cultures that are different from mine too, to be inspired and to join in celebration. And yeah, so I'm going to come back to beauty and just having gratitude for the beauty in this space.
That was so beautifully said from all of you. Thank you so much for sharing. And to Melody's point about co-creation, I think it's an exciting moment for us to kind of lean into the chat once again. If you all would like to share what culture and community mean to you, we would love to see that, embrace that, and even highlight some of those moments throughout today's webinar. So please share in the chat what culture and community mean to you as well. I love that there's so much synergy in what all of you shared, from this healing component to empowerment, and even just the safety that comes with community. And I think that oftentimes in the global majority, there are moments where our community and culture are seen as negatives, and I did not hear one negative as each of you shared. And so the next question kind of speaks to that a little bit more, on the work that you all do. In what ways have you seen strong connections to community and culture impact mental health for BIPOC individuals and communities?
I'll be happy to jump in with that. So we all know what happened in 2020. And I would say even before that, it's just sometimes been hard to move through this world as a Black man. I remember when I was moving out to Oregon, my grandpa, in his way of humor, but also kind of giving me a heads up, he said, "You're going to be a speck of pepper in a bowl of milk." And I had no idea of what he was saying until I looked up the statistics around Portland at that time, which was 1.7% African American in the state of Oregon. And as somebody who's mostly been in spaces where people don't look like me, might not talk like me, might not do the same kind of celebrations, there was a lot of time that I kind of built up a lot of self-hate in myself because I didn't understand who I was. I didn't have strong ties to my identity. But by the time I got to Oregon, I had a really good, clear picture of who I was and a lot about how this world viewed me on my best days and my worst days. Kind of how Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about in the book, Between the World and Me. There's a lot of complexity when it comes to that, especially as he's trying to pass these messages down to his son about how the world views you. But oh my, when I get people in my life that can see me for who I really am and see that strength, and not just see me as a problem or see me and my issues as a deficit, but possibility, that can be so healing. And so to talk about 2020 and in the past couple of years, I've been part of what's called the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, which is DBSA. They've had some weekly opportunities for Black folks to meet up and talk about mental health. And what's great about it is it's led by a professional peer support specialist. So this person has to go through hours upon hours of training to be able to hold these spaces for us, because all types of things show up. And what's great about it is, like, even when the conversation gets heavy, right? We're able to still hold that space because we know we've all been through something heavy. And I know every group, has their stories and they have their background. I can only speak for myself in this group. It's been transformational and it's been impactful in the sense that as soon as I logged on to that first call where I was nervous, I didn't have my screen on, I immediately felt healing to see people in the group that looked like me and that were just excited to be there, but also just carrying something heavy. And as the years have progressed, they've actually, now they have a wait list every day of the week. So before it was just one group, and now they have a wait list every day of the week. And I used to be in other groups and I found benefit from them, but that space has just been so great. And I always will call it out when other fellows are on the call, because I'm like, hey guys, like, it's just me, like, where's everybody else at? Where are the dads? Can we talk about that? Can we talk about the ways intersectionality impacts what mental health looks like? But even just when somebody shares, even if I don't necessarily relate to it, I can understand that pain. I can understand that struggle. right? Like we probably ate the same thing at Thanksgiving, or we both know you don't change the recipe to mac and cheese when it's Christmas time. But also just some of those things that are hard to explain, some of those intangibles, some of that tacit experience that's hard to translate. It's just been healing those spaces. So I would say that's been a space that's really saved my life. I've had some tough times. We moved to Texas actually in 2020 from Baltimore, Maryland. So we experienced what we experienced in Baltimore, Maryland during the uprisings, and then moved to Texas. And all we heard on our way to Texas was NPR saying something else that was like, turn around, go back to Northeast, turn around, go back to Northeast. And we know that everything isn't all bad, but when you're having a day where all you see reflected back to you is that fear, that uncertainty, that kind of isolation, and it's just you and your family in a U-Haul moving across, it can get tough. So I would say finding that DBSA group has been impactful because it is that intersection of culture and community that has paid dividends beyond really anything I can imagine. For example, there's been times where I haven't realized I haven't been telling my wife, right, things that have been on my mind or that have been heavy, but I'm able to learn how to articulate those things because of this group. So it's not a classroom, right? There's no program, there are no slides, there's no agenda, but because of being in this group, I'm able to actually bring things into my everyday life that are helpful because I have this community of support there of folks who are talking about these things every single Monday.
Thank you so much, Sinclair, for sharing your personal story. And then I'm just finding threads of connection too. I am currently located in so-called Portland, Oregon, and yeah, it can definitely feel isolating. So one of the first things I did when I moved here was I found that there was a Portland queer AAPI meetup, and I'm like, I need to be there. I need to be with my people. And also I lived for just over a decade in so-called Austin, Texas. And also we have a really sweet group of Austin therapists of color, and that's a community where we can support one another. Speaking of community, I see one of my teachers here, Manuel, just want to say hi from the Institute of Chicanic Psychology. I see you in the chat, so check out their powerful work too. And so I'm just, yeah, even in this space, feeling a sense of connection is calming for me. I was very nervous at first, and just finding groundedness. When I think about the impact of the connections of community and culture, I just remembering how like colonialism attempts to sever our interconnectedness. It attempts to erase our cultures. It attempts to disempower our communities. And as mental health professionals, similar to what Sinclair was sharing about, like when we experience feelings of depression, loneliness, anxiety, our field teaches to individualize these symptoms, saying there's something you're not doing right, or there's something you need to do better, or you need to seek treatment in a one-on-one setting. And as people of color, we know that that is such a limitation to our healing, that our healing is often in community. It is through communion. It is through our bodies. It's through song. It's through food. That's usually what I talk about the most. You're speaking of mac and cheese, you know, it's through food. And so when it comes to community and culture, I think it's also reclaiming our power to heal with one another, to tend to one another, to share our wisdoms, lived experiences. I'm seeing in the chat reminders about connections between elders and the youth too, how the youth, you know, motivates us and teaches me a lot of new things, and the elders pass on their wisdoms, and how we can co-create these, like, you know, bubbles, ecosystems where we tend to one another and we're not reliant on these institutions that individualize our pains.
So what you both said really resonated with me, and something I think we have in common. So I completed my doctoral degree at the University of Oregon. So I spent 5 years in Eugene, Oregon, and I had a very similar experience to both of you upon arrival, right? I remember telling everyone, you know, so just my trajectory very quick. I went to undergrad in San Diego, then I did my master's in New York, and then and I grew up in LA. So moving to Oregon was the first time I experienced being somewhere where I wasn't constantly surrounded by others who looked like me, and having that cultural safety net. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood that was 90+% Latinx identified, and I didn't realize how much of a protective factor that was for me. Yes, I will hear things about the neighborhood that I grew up in, maybe that it wasn't the safest. You know, I remember one time I was at a gathering, a social gathering in Oregon, and someone asked me where I was from, and I shared where I grew up, shared where I went to school. I went to North Hollywood High School, by the way. And their first response to me was, "Oh, how did you survive? Wasn't that super dangerous? Like, how are you okay?" And I had so many reactions to that, because in my mind, I'm like, how is it okay for you to ask me that right now in this setting? Like, how is that okay? I'm not on display for you. But that was the reality that other people experienced when they witnessed my neighborhood. But my experience was very different. Mine was community. Mine was, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, my dad wanted a soda. I would go to the, apartment number 25, where they had a little store in their shop, like in their home. And I would get soda, I would get my hot Cheetos, because I'm a hot Cheeto queen, and it made me so happy, right? And those, so when we talk about community healing and that mental health, that's what comes to mind for me. It's those moments that you feel safe, you can be fully yourself, and then finding your community to help you bring that into the other spaces that you're entering, right? So a big part of the specialty that I have is working with first-gen professionals. And that often means it's a lot of folks who are entering these new spaces for the very first time, needing to learn how to navigate all these new spaces. And something that I remind the folks who I work with to focus on is the fact that this is something that they've had to do their whole life. This is something that they have mastered. You've mastered how to navigate, you mastered how to adapt, but now we need to learn how to master how to bring in our authentic selves into these spaces, because that is what is needed. And maybe if you don't feel like you're fully belonging in those spaces, it's creating our own spaces. And that's also why we're here, and recognizing, you know what, sometimes it's like that community isn't the community that I'm ready to join. I kind of want my own community, and I'm going to open up these doors for my community in that way. And so that's something else that I speak to first-gen professionals about. It's, make it your own, and own that. And that is beautiful. And so community is what helps you feel empowered to do that. And that's part of that mental health and that healing component. And so I could talk about this forever, especially if we go down memory lane when I was in Oregon with that adjustment. But I think the one thing that I'll say is that I think I personally know that in every space that I've been in, anytime I felt very down, the moment where I finally felt like I had a light, like I had hope, was when I connected with someone who I felt seen by. They didn't always necessarily look like me, but we shared in a community or cultural element, whether it was our collectivistic views or spiritual perspectives. And that is what kept me going, because I wanted to quit so many times. I was so afraid so many times. But when I found that person who I could just share my fears with, then we could hold them together. And like Sinclair, you said that quote, Tracy Ellis Ross, it's like, and then it can become inspiration, and then it's no longer fear. And so, thank you.
Can I just say something to continue the conversation about being seen? Now I'm getting worked up. Before I had the professional face on, now you got trying to tear up a little bit. 600 people. Yeah, I mean, so my therapist now, and I was on a hunt. Somebody talked about like there's this deficit when it comes to the number of mental health specialists of color. And you can have a ton of mental health specialists of color in Baltimore, or anywhere in the DMV or in Florida. But I live in Texas, so they can't necessarily practice where I am. And there are mental health coaches, there are different types of services, but I say all that to say it was really hard for me to find a Black therapist. And so my therapist is not Black. She identifies as a white woman. And where we intersect is like she's a Christian, right? So she's faith-based. But she said she was culturally competent. And I used our first hour meeting to really suss that out. I was like, let's see what that means, right? So there's times where I go into a room and I'm like, I'm Black. I see the discomfort. I see somebody being like, why do you say that? Or I'm like, I'm African American. Or I talk about my experiences as a Black man, and they're like, well, that's everyone's experience. And I'm like, sure, that could be a lot of people's experience, but can you center me right now? Can you see me, and can we deal with what's on the table right now from where I'm coming from? And I think and so just to say it, she's great. We're still working together. I hear it takes about like 16 sessions sometimes to get accustomed to that therapist. So that's what another therapist told me, like, I guess to like not keep quitting therapists. But she's been great. We've met a ton of times. And every time I meet with her, I feel seen, I feel heard. And even when there are things that she doesn't understand, she's brave enough to ask the questions. So we've created a very brave space in those sessions where I don't feel like I have to educate her on things, but she does to tell me more. Or she goes, I remember you told me about this with your grandpa. Or she's like, oh, I know you were navigating this at work, right? You know, we can go there with racial battle fatigue. And she's continuing to educate herself as an ally. And so for me, right, like allies for me are people that are willing to go to bat for you, are standing proxy of you when things get tough. It's not just a title or a training that you've gone through. So I feel like she's an ally, but I also feel like she's my community now. She's another person that I can reach out to and count on to feel seen. And there are times where I'm in spaces where I just feel exhausted after leaving those spaces because I've had to educate, I've had to hide, I've had to code switch, right? I feel like I've had to like just kind of lower myself so that others feel like they can show up and not have to be uncomfortable around conversations like race, etc. But because we connect on those things, faith, and because we connect on family, and just the idea that we both deserve a seat at the table, right? And if a table is not where we want to be, or a seat's not where we want, we deserve a seat in a presence anywhere. And like you were saying, Dr. Sanchez, like you can build the table. I feel like she does that for me. And so having that partner, in those senses, I feel like is community. And I feel like when I'm in spaces where people are like, what do you bring? Like, how do you thrive? I love what you said because you're talking about like people are like, how did you survive there? I want people to ask me questions like, how did you thrive? Like, where did you have fun? Like, where did you go to kick it? Like for me, we had a corner store and we had Walmart. First was a corner store, and that was just a gas station. And then 20 minutes away was Walmart, and Walmart was the mall. That's how I grew up. But people often assume that like I grew up where there was like lots of violence, or they're like, I assume that you like these different things. But when they ask questions and they get just beneath the surface with me, I'm like, no, I like Spider-Man, right? Like I like being Black, being a person of color is not, there's no monolithic take on it. Like we all bring something different, but just for a person to be able to say like, hey, I want to know more about you. Like, what have you experienced? And approaching me from a place of, I'm going to see you as a whole person versus a person with things to fix versus a person that's just been struggling forever. That helps me, even on my hardest days, because I'm like, they're still seeing the best in me, even though things are tough. Like, I don't need spaces where everyone's just like, things are going to be bad, your people have it so bad, like, good luck. I need spaces where people are like, no, it is tough right now, and it is hard right now, but I have a little bit on my plate to give to you to say, let's walk together, right? Let's go together, and let me ask you how you're doing. Or I don't have it, maybe you should connect with this person. I want places where people are like, how can we thrive? How can we move forward? How can we get to where we need to be? Even if somebody's just like, look, you need to go pray, or you need to go sit down somewhere, or you need to go see the doctor. I know you've been avoiding that physical all year, or I know you've been working hard and you've been hustling and side hustling. Have you spent time with your daughter? Like, what's that looking like? Like, I want people like that around me versus people who are just like, I'm so heartbroken because you're heartbroken, and stop. I need a little bit more. I need some life. I need some care and some love as well, and not just to be seen as somebody who's a statistic or who's beat the statistics because I'm 35 and what a miracle that is. Yeah, we can hold space for the miracle. And also, where's everything else?
I just want to add a little love there. I love the reframing these questions, right? It's like think about yourselves, right? As you're engaging with someone, if your thought is, how did you survive there? How did you thrive, right? Like be curious about the hope and the positives. And I love that messaging so much, Sinclair. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm feeling chills like from this conversation and just generally speaking what the chat has shared as well. There's just so much love and beauty in this space around what culture is, what community is, and how it's constantly evolving. It means different things to different people. And most importantly, it is a space of safety. It's protected. There's resilience found in culture and community as well. One of the other things that we have seen in the chat is people sharing that maybe it's difficult for them to establish a sense of community and culture. And so our next question kind of speaks to that. And I'm wondering if each of you could just share a little bit about ways to find culture and community, or maybe even for BIPOC folks who feel disconnected from their culture and community. What advice would you give folks who are looking to establish that for themselves?
When I'm hearing this question, I'm pausing because I don't know about y'all, but like I'm just feeling really tender. Just I'm looking at the chat and seeing and hearing y'all's stories, Dr. Sanchez and Sinclair, about how deeply we all desire and also deserve to be fully seen, known, accepted, and to belong. And I'm loving the reminder, this empowerment that we can co-create these spaces. And sometimes it is hard to find spaces that that we can feel safe in, especially people with, you know, multiple intersecting marginalized identities. BIPOC, you know, QT BIPOC folks, disabled BIPOC folks, neurodivergent BIPOC folks, and I'm also seeing, this may feel a little bit like a plug, also therapists of wanting to connect with one another too, to say being in this field can also feel isolating and alone, that I might be the only visible minoritized person in my school, in my program, and then in supervision, and then again in these practices. And that is one reason why we co-created spaces like Austin Therapists of Color, which and also inclusive therapists too, where we just say, come on in, and find your people, connect with your circles, and to be seen. And then in that way, also sharing our stories, right? I think something that Dr. Sanchez reminded me, it's also leading with authenticity. Part of finding our sense of belonging is to say, I am willing to unfold my story in front of others in hopes that they will connect with me, and then I can connect deeper with them. For myself, I am a Hong Konger. I'm from a little place called Hong Kong. I'm an immigrant. I immigrated and did not speak English. My parents didn't speak English. And so finding connection was really vital to our survival. And so, you know, cultural preservation is also feels like a responsibility to me and also my future generations to say, yes, I have now found my spaces. How do I lead with authenticity, share my story, and also invite others in to say, hey, I'm noticing that you're new here. I'm noticing that you might be disconnected. I'm noticing that you might be one of the few, you know, therapists of color. You might be one of the few Black therapists. You might want to be one of the few Latinx therapists in this region. Come on in. Can we share a meal? And I know, going back to food again. And so if folks are feeling disconnected from their community, loving Sinclair's reminder, start with what brings you joy. What gives you pleasure? What brings life to you? What makes you curious? What do you want to, what do you wonder about? What do you want to learn about? And then there is that part where it does take a little bit of risk taking, but if we can do this together, where I'm going to extend a bit of myself to you to share my story with you, I'm also going to invite you in. Please receive my invitation. Then we can start co-creating these spaces together.
Melody, thank you for that. Yeah, there's a lot of power in that co-creation and in taking those risks. But I also want to acknowledge how much courage it takes, because it's a lot of vulnerability that we show up in that way, to show up in our authentic self. And it's so scary to wonder, you know, will everyone accept me? And that the reality is not everyone will, right? And that's where the fear comes from. And for me, as someone, you know, being raised in the home dynamic that I was, something that I experienced and many first-gen professionals experience is something called parentification. And with parentification, it's something, you know, where you're young and you're placed in the role of an adult. And so then you start taking on these responsibilities of maybe holding emotions for your elders, or, you know, taking care of them in one way or another. And remember, something that I've been sharing with you all is that oftentimes we look back at these experiences and think, that was awful, that sucked, I can't believe I had to go through that. And we don't go back and think of everything that we've gained from that, because I was the bridge for my parents to connect that culture between their home country and this new country. And that was the most powerful gift I think they could have given me. As tough as that was, I feel so much pride in having been able to do that for them and having been able to be there for them. So I share that because I was a child. Yes, I was scared, right? And I still had my family was they needed that support. They depended on me, but they helped me in the best ways that they could, right? They did everything that just based on what they knew. My parents, just also a little bit of background, were just in more rural areas and didn't have a lot of access to education where they were raised. And so they also had a bit more limited education coming in, which meant when you're not as educated, you're also not sure how to seek out and find resources. So another way, I guess, a part of building community is seeking out these resources, like the ones that Melody has mentioned, the ones that Sinclair has mentioned. We've all been talking about different kinds of communities that you can seek out and find. Mental Health America, I'm sure, has an amazing resource list of all these different organizations, maybe by your state, by your country, by your city. But I think that's the beautiful part about having an online community. Something that I will add is, since I've been more active online, I feel that I am able to connect with so many more folks. And even in this space, I think if I didn't show up as myself in many of these spaces, I wouldn't have been invited to be on this panel, to have these conversations with these other amazing folks. And I guess that's part of the risk, right? You show up, you try, and then you connect. And maybe you're in Oregon, Texas, California, and everywhere else. I think that's where the panelists are right now. I'm not sure, Nia, where you are, but you're all over. But this is community, and this is beautiful. And so I'll stop there because I can go on.
No, go on. We need this. We need this.
All right, everyone. So I need everyone's information. Drop your LinkedIn in the chat. No, but let's connect. Let's start a new group. Sorry, Sinclair, don't get me started. You said.
I think one thing for me that's helped. So let me know if you ever consider yourself a people pleaser. If you ever consider yourself a people pleaser, or a recovering people pleaser, I'll give you that. Drop a 1 in the chat. Just drop the number 1 in the chat. Let me know who the people pleasers are. Right? Yes. And so for me, I heard this quote once. So for me, social media is I have a little bookmark in my Instagram that's called IG University, because I learned so much from Instagram. I know people learn so much from TikTok. You just Google self-help therapy. Not everything is valid, but there's some really cool gems there. And one person was talking about how when you go into a space and there's people there, especially thinking about that fear Dr. Sanchez was talking about of connecting with people. For me, I like to ask myself, who is somebody in here I want to meet? Or what do I think about them? Because oftentimes I'll put on this mask, I'll put on this shield. For example, I've been meeting with a lot of Black men in San Antonio. We're out here and connecting, but I'll be honest with y'all, I go in there going am I cool enough? Am I tough enough? I will stereotype my own people, right? Again, I'm learning that self-hate. Will they accept me? Because I've had times in the past where my Black card has been pulled, which for those who don't know what that means is if you don't understand a cultural reference, someone takes your Black card from you and they're you're not Black enough. And I'm sure everyone has those cultural references. And so there's been times where I feel I've been checked and I didn't take it as humor. I took it seriously and I felt I didn't belong because I didn't have some of those shared experiences. But whenever I do it, it does feel good. Like I was talking about earlier, I know what this TV show is or this reference is. But all that to say, I find myself, sometimes fawning or sometimes just overdoing it with how can I get these people to love me and accept me? But 2 things help. Number 1, asking myself, do I like these people and who connects with my values, and not trying to connect with every single person in the room. Just find a couple brothers to just hit it off with, and they don't have to Marvel or it's okay if they more DC. We can still kick it, but I can go there with that. But if I'm talking to somebody else and they're talking about sports and I don't really connect, let's find something else. Right. So who are the people I can connect with, and who do I like? And then number 2, and this is a tough one, but I learned this in Eugene, Oregon. I was living with hippies for a year, actual hippies, tempeh and nutritional yeast, all that hot tub, biodiverse honeybees. We were just with the land. And someone told me, they said, whenever you're feeling afraid in a situation, size up the room, find a couple people and think to yourself, this person could love me. Or what would it be like if this person loved me? And it does so much for me because of the things I've experienced when I was growing up, whether it's the bullying or the hard days, the hard times. It helps me to put myself in a position where there's possibility and there's hope that I can connect with this person. And like I talked about earlier, it is powerful to connect with people in your community, and in your culture. And it's powerful for Black men, especially, to connect, because there's so much that separates us, that divides us. There's so many reasons that we're not connected with each other. Just take a history class and you'll learn there's so many reasons for us to have that connection. But when we get together and when we're tight and we meet and we connect, beautiful things happen. When we get beyond the stereotypes, or we get beyond things that push us away from each other, we get beyond the misunderstandings. Like for me, when I connect with other people who have kids, especially the girl dads out there, or just people who have kids in general, we connect right there. Like, hey, how much sleep did you get last night? 0. Me too, right? Like, that's instant connection. I'll say one more thing too, when you're looking to connect with people, maybe you're going to find community by volunteering, maybe you're going to your church, maybe you're going to music festivals, maybe you're in Portland for the big meetup we're all going to have next year. And you're just connecting you're trying to find ways to connect with people. One piece of advice I heard in a podcast was to try to get just beneath the surface with people. So instead of just like, where are you from? And like, okay, cool, we connected on that. Try to get just beneath the surface. Like, try to find out what people's goals are, or what they're looking forward to. Get past how the weather is. Like, be a little bold enough to be like, what you want to do with that? Right? When they tell you what they're doing or what they're experiencing, or like find ways to connect with them that can take the conversation just a little bit deeper. You don't have to share your whole life story. Y'all don't have to be best friends afterward, but just to get a little bit deeper. And for me, as somebody who's a recovering people pleaser, it's helped me because I'm bringing people in who I've been intentionally having these deeper connections with, even if it takes like 5 or 6 times meeting. And I'm connecting with people who I felt intimidated around before, or feel like I don't belong, or I'm not X, Y, or Z enough, but people that are willing to bring me in because I did that brave and bold thing of thinking to myself, what if this person could love me? What if we can connect? What if we could help each other heal by the connection that we do? What if we could unlearn things together, right? We're talking about gentle parenting. What if we can get to those places where we're unlearning things together and we're healing together? Those what ifs can become reality. There's a potential for that, versus seeing the world as this place where nothing's ever going to be good, because that's reinforced every time you open up your phone or every time you leave the house. It just feels so hopeless. But there's this that beauty that can happen. It can catch up to you. It can surprise you when you have relationships with people that you never thought you would have. And I gotta say, I did this Black men's yoga. So they had a whole yoga thing. It's Alex Bailey. He's the founder of Black Outside. And they provide outdoor experiences for Black youth. And they go hiking and camping. And if I told my grandpa about this, he'd be like, what are y'all doing? That sounds dangerous. And I would translate it with them. Like, I find myself being really good at translating things to older generations and just making it palatable, and being like, imagine if you were with this group and there were these places, and let's look at some stats. And like, y'all had a nice group and you were educated on what to do, and it's well-traveled, would you go? But yeah, they do these things. And so they had a Black men's meetup. And all these guys are there, and we met up in the yoga studio. And when we got there, they were asking us about what we're bringing into the space and what we want to leave with. And a couple minutes later, we're on our mats and we've already checked in. And some brothers started saying, like, this is the safest I've felt in a long time. And I said out loud, this is the safest I've felt in a long time, because I just crossed some barrier that said, separate from these men, don't connect, you won't be safe, you won't be comfortable, you can't be yourself. And I got in there and I was just embraced by presence. I felt welcome. There were smiles, clapping up, shaking hands. Eventually those turned into hugs afterwards. Afterwards, we're drinking healthy juices, which if I were to go back home and be like, I've been drinking some real juices, they'd be like, what are you talking about? But like, it's just a different way of life. Like, I don't laugh at the healthy way anymore. I don't laugh at the idea of like having different dietary needs. I don't laugh at what healthiness can look like, because I've been exposed to different things because of community. So literally all these things have enriched me by taking that extra step to do something that maybe I'm not comfortable with, something that's unknown, and then ideally bringing it back to those people that I truly care about, whether it's that family or that found family or my own unit or whatever friend groups it is. It just multiplies. So I feel like the healing that we get in community and the healing that we get from culture, it just raises everybody up as we pour into ourselves. When we go back to those units or wherever we call work or wherever we exist on a day-to-day basis, wherever that looks like, it brings something brighter back because we got that from the spaces that fill us. See, I could talk for a long time too, Dr. Sanchez. Don't get me started.
I'm at Hattie, please go, and then I'll share.
I love y'all's banter though. And I'm loving how, you are also kind of living and showing this vulnerability and addressing really how scary it is sometimes, especially as adults, to show up and to meet others. And sometimes it can feel a little bit like high school again. Like, is that person going to like me? Is that person going to accept me? But as both of you shared, that sometimes the scaries is an opportunity for growth and connection. And so I was started to think, are there spaces where we can all feel a little bit scared together? And when I think about that, yes, oftentimes it's trying something new. Taking a class, when I moved to Portland, I realized that, wow, there's a whole community of folks that I can't communicate with, which is the deaf community. And there's a disconnection between us, and that's on me for not knowing how to sign. And so I said, this is really scary, but I'm going to learn to sign so that can widen my community, and also to learn about deaf culture. And also when I moved here, I was like, ooh, the outdoors can feel a little bit scary, especially for BIPOC folks. These spaces are not really intended for folks like us. And I learned about wild diversity, which is BIPOC and LGBTQ folks connecting in the outdoors together. And the intention is we can all be kind of scared together, where we can lean on one another. And these opportunities also foster opportunities for connection, where we're like, we did this scary thing together, we held one another, and we got to learn and experience some magic together. And I found those experiences to be bonding. So I'm really appreciating how we're talking about the scaries too, because that's real.
I love all of this, and something that I wanted to add, and just share like a perspective that I have on things. And so these conversations, they're making me hungry. But I want to explain what I mean to you when I say hungry. In addition to all the food, hungry to me, when I'm like, I'm hungry, I want something. And I want to create something, and I'm hungry for it. And so, because oftentimes I think of the term hungry and hangry, because let's be honest, sometimes I do get a little hangry. But when I'm hangry, it's also because I'm extra motivated to get what I want, and I need to take care of it. So when I'm feeling inspired, and that's how I'm feeling right now, I'm like, I'm feeling so hungry right now, and I'm feeling so ready to go do something with this energy. And just wanted to share that bit of perspective for you all. So I'm hungry.
Yes, I love the modeling of community building that's happening even on this call as we speak. We've sort of become a community as this conversation has progressed, and it's really beautiful to watch that live in action. Each of you spoke a little bit to the fact that culture and community are really protective. They're safe spaces. They're things that have helped you to transition throughout different time periods in your life. And really the power of those moments of being seen, as you've put it before, or even just shared experiences and shared values and community can't be overstated. So I'm going to shift a little bit to some of the chat questions, and excuse me if I have to remix them, because I'm trying to read and share them with you at the same time. But essentially, one of them spoke to intersections, right? So understanding that no culture is a monolith, that there are so many different varieties of culture and community. Everybody has a different definition of those things. And then we all also have so many different cultures that we embody in one individual being. So as individuals are seeking to establish their sense of community where they are, and a sense of belonging, which we know improves mental health outcomes, what advice would you have in communities to honor intersectionality?
Oh, so important. Thank you for bringing this up. Intersectionality is really at the heart of belonging, and it is paying attention to who might be left out, who might not have access to these spaces. And with Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw teaching us about intersectionality, of how we need to prioritize and uplift the most marginalized among us. And that requires us to live in community, to understand folks' struggles, but also for myself is checking the privileges that I have, because I have privileges of body, of skin color, and so forth, that may make me honestly ignorant or oblivious to folks with multiple marginalized identities. And so I'm really appreciating this question. So in all the spaces that we're in, I encourage us to ask, how accessible is this space? How do we make this space more accessible to folks? And also seeking the expertise of people with lived experiences on how to make these spaces accessible is really important, as opposed to assuming what folks are needing. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but I get fired up when I talk about intersectionality. I love it.
Melody, I love that you bring up like checking our privileges in different spaces when we're trying to be mindful of our intersectional identities. And sometimes we're unaware of that privilege. And so with that, it's needing to educate yourself. Pamela Hayes has a framework that's a great one to get started. It's just the addressing framework to just get an idea of like, what are some areas you may have privilege in? I think that's a helpful starting point. But something that I also say, it's like, I know there's often many exhibitions and there's so many different ways to educate yourself on what other people's lives are like with different accessibility, with different resources. And, you know, I think there was a exhibit when I lived in New York that was called like something after dark. I'm trying to remember if someone can, like if someone knows what I'm talking about, please let me know. I'll try to find it and like send it out to people. But essentially it was, they created a space where you could experience what it was like to navigate New York City as a person who's blind. And I remember like going to this and thinking, you know, what is it gonna be like? And all of our guides had different kinds of levels of visual impairments. And then we learned and we were educated on this. And I remember how fearful I was sort of going into it and how much that was checking my privilege too, because I was afraid of something and I was like, oh, this must be so hard and challenging, but not in the ways that I imagined. And so that really challenged a lot of my perspectives. And so I think immersing yourself in some of those experiences is very helpful for creating new perspectives. And then learning from our own experiences. I myself, I fractured my right ankle in the fall. And so then I was in a wheelchair for 2 months. I had no weight bearing. I had to learn how to rely on everyone for help. I could barely go to the bathroom by myself. I needed help with showering. I needed help with everything. And when I was finally feeling a little bit better, I was like, okay, maybe I can go out to eat. Let's get lunch somewhere or do something, right? And then I would look up places, and everywhere online says, oh, this place is accessible. It's wheelchair friendly. You can do this. I'm like, oh, let's go to this place. This seems like I could go here. And getting there and realizing that it was not as accessible as they were promoting themselves to be, and feeling so frustrated with that, having people needing to get up from their tables to make room for me to get through, to be able to go somewhere to eat, is not the way that I want to experience a dinner, right? And that's not the way that anyone should have to experience going out and being in the world. And that made me so much more aware, because it checked my like able-bodied privilege so much. And so now everywhere I go, I'm like so mindful and so aware, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, how accessible is this place? Can I invite someone who has mobility impairments to this place? Can I do that? What would that look like? And so anyway, I share that with you all because it's like, look around and really think about it. Like, many people have these signs and they promote that they are, you know, inclusive, that they do this. And then you walk in and then you see pictures of everyone who doesn't look like you, stairs that you can't go up on. And so just something to think about as we're thinking about our inclusivity, intersectionality. And I think I also may have gone on a tangent from what the question was, Melody, but just wanted to share that with you all.
Awesome. So as we get ready to wrap up, someone did enter into the chat a question for all of you. And I'm hoping that our chat attendees can give us their input as well. It's a really good way for us to kind of do a quick round robin, and then I'll give some housekeeping notes to end. But what's one thing about your community and culture that's bringing you joy today?
Listen, I'm glad to be alive another day. When I look back at what I've been through, and look back and just look at the news and see what other folks are going through, I'm just glad to be here another day. Sometimes that's my baseline. Years ago, somebody told me, I was like, what are you thankful for? And they were like, I'm glad to be alive another day. And I was like, okay, but what are you actually thankful for? And through perspective and life experience, I know that that is a solid and real answer. One thing I do is I keep a win journal in my notes app. So I write down any wins that happen. And I don't like journaling. So I don't know why. I'm not a journaler, but this is a way of journaling. So basically what I do is I just write a bullet point and I go, woke up today, or did 5 push-ups, or got a nice compliment from somebody. And then I'll also have a Google folder that I call my rainy day folder. So when someone sends me like a compliment or a good job on something, I'll put it in there to remind me of the positive things that are going on. And then also I just love all the drama happening online with Keke Palmer and Usher and her boyfriend. So that's bringing me joy, because, I don't know about y'all, but for me, and the people I consider my people, like, we can make jokes out of anything and we can add levity to it, especially when it's needed, especially when things are heavy. So if you need a laugh, go ahead and look that up. You might be in your feelings if you are threatened by Usher, like a lot of people are, about them taking your partner. But I just think it's so funny. And I just think it's so great to see Keke Palmer also just of where she's been in her life. So just seeing that Black achievement, the excellence, but also just having space to just joke and just kick it, even online when I don't know any of these people who are on Instagram.
Whew. I love this question, and I'm also reading the chat. Thank you, Sinclair, for sharing. I mentioned my people, the Hong Kongers. Just want to say a little bit about us, because we're we're a small group. Our people, we endured British colonization, Japanese occupation. We're actually currently enduring cultural erasure right now, which is actually not safe for me to talk about for the safety of my family. And so I encourage folks to learn a little bit about us and how we're fighting really to preserve our culture and to pass it on to future generations. And so something that gives me a lot of joy right now is it's Pride. Yes, Pride is in June. Pride is also in July and August in a lot of different spaces, and just seeing queer, trans, non-binary, people of color, hearing different languages throughout Pride, and seeing people celebrate and not only live but thrive, Sinclair, thrive authentically, make connections, celebrate one another, seeing allyship. Brings me a lot of joy, especially as queer, non-binary people of color. We're told that we're not supposed to exist, that we are supposed to disappear. And so the more we can create these spaces for ourselves, but also for future generations, to say we not only deserve to exist, but we deserve to live fully. That's giving me a lot of joy right now.
I mean, we've been talking about community this whole time, and honestly, what's bringing me a lot of joy in this moment is being here with you all, seeing all of the chats, and just feeling hungry by all of that. But I also want to add what made me, and what every day, what I try to wake up also with gratitude. I try to end my day with gratitude, even when it's a hard day. So similar to Sinclair, just having a moment of just reflection. Like, what am I grateful for today? And being so grateful for the small moments. So when I woke up this morning, grateful to be waking up with energy, not having to stress out about how far I have to make it to the bathroom. As someone, like, when I talk about my mobility, it's like when I have to get up, how much I have to think about. I'm grateful to not have to think about all of those things in the moment. But I'm also, I don't know if you can see my little plush back here. This is a replica of my cat. His name is Louis. He's the love of my life. He would be in here, but then he would probably jump on the computer and that. But he brings me joy every single day, and he cuddled with me extra hard this morning. And that was just the best way to start the day.
Thank you all so much for sharing, not just what brings you joy, but all of the really beautiful and even intimate things that you've shared in the past hour. I'm sure it's had so much benefit for our audience. I've benefited personally from being on this panel today, and I'm just grateful for everything that you all have contributed to the conversation. So just some housekeeping as we wrap up. We'll be in touch with everyone in the next few days with follow-up materials and the link with the request for their certificate of attendance. Yes, we've had so many good comments in the chat, and we're really excited to continue to engage with you. So feel free to look at our webinar calendar on mhanational.org and continue to join us for the rest of the series throughout the month of July. And thank you, everyone. We've had a wonderful conversation. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and keep an eye out for any additional opportunities to engage during BIPOC Mental Health Month. Thank you.
Thank you, y'all. Naya, you rock.
Thank you.
Yes, thank
You
you,
all
Naya.
rock
You
as
were
well.
Thank you, everyone. Sending love to everyone. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you for sharing space with us.
Good to meet you, Melody and Lisette.
good to meet you.
Let's stay connected.
Stay connected.
And hungry.
Hungry.
I got pizza right now.
I was like, we're all gonna eat after this. I know it's not just me. Yeah.